before we jump right into it, I mean, this is reverse redaction. We're reverse redacting podcast today, getting meta. And before we get into that, let's do the simultaneous sigh as we gulp in the essential substance around us, carbon monoxide. No. All right. So I always find that taking a deep breath helps clear my mind. Also gives me a sense of dopamine that just feels good. So doing it together can give us all a sense of unity as we remember that we need to breathe. Howlies as we are. So let's get all our breath out. We're getting ready to take a giant sigh, and let's sigh. Feels so good. Oh, so guys, how you doing? Ford. I'm here with Ford and Jared. Reverse redacting podcast. After talking, I thought a good discussion last week about Joe Rogan. And maybe continuing a lot of the themes that we started with, some ideas that we started to get into on that podcast. Have you guys had a good week?
Yeah. It's, it's like you said, sometimes it's a false positive, but sometimes it's like a mix of things, right? Like there's a signal and noise ratio in multiple planes, and you just need to learn to filter out the noise. And I'm not so good at that. I hear what did you say? What did you say to me? And that's all I can hear. There's 95 good things, and I let that one bad thing totally derail all motor functions. So, yeah.
How about you, Jared?
Yeah, pretty good week. I went to a little going away party for one of my old film professors who is his wife just finished a master's program at UGA, and they're moving to Seattle. So, and I apologize for my audio because I got a new mic this week, and somehow Chrome just keeps auto adjusting. I don't know. Yeah. But other than that, it was good. So got to see some people that I hadn't seen in a while. Almost got in a wreck because driver did one of those things where they pull out of there's two lanes in each direction, and they pull out of the side road, and you think, are you gonna just pull out into the lane closest to you, or are you gonna go all the way over into my lane? Because I don't trust people to do that. Yeah. Most of the time they just stay in their own little lane, though. But nope, this guy not only was coming into my lane, he was headed for the turning lane on the other side of me. So I was proud of myself for doing some little Need for Speed defensive driving there and dodging him. So I could have had a very different week.
Wow. Yeah, actually, I did too. I was trying to test drive. I don't think Melissa's going to hear this, so I can say this. I liquidated my Ethereum this week in order to buy a piece of junk beater, 300,000 mile Ford truck. I need to get a work truck, and guy was real nice. He's like, yeah, take it for a spin. He's right off of 98, the highway between us and Pensacola on the beach side. And so it goes through Walton County and our neighboring county. And so they're the ones that has Seaside, where they filmed Truman Show. So he's right in that area. So I drove down it's the next community up from Seaside, Seagrove or Watercolor. I think it was Seagrove. And these places are they're trying to be like Venice or something. Everything's real narrow, and there are people walking everywhere. And so I was looking for a turnaround spot, but there's no real good place to turn around. So I turn off the main thoroughfare and it's all gravel roads and crap. And I'm like, oh gosh, how do I get out of here? It's like a maze, and there's just not even room to do a 3-point turn in front of these nice houses. And so I finally come back, and I'm coming down the gravel road. I'm looking to the left because I got to take a left. And I'm just thinking about traffic, and I'm thinking about all this crap, right? And I turn my head back, and there are this trio or quartet of teenage girls on bicycles.
Mm.
And I am coming right into the bicycle lane. Like I'm just not used to seeing it because in Panama City, we just don't, I don't know. I mean, so I'm coming up, I don't know. I guess I was going faster than I thought I was. And I'm like, oh crap! I slam my brakes. Somehow, this girl, I did not hit this girl. I mean, she must have been 6 inches away from her in a borrowed truck that I'm test driving.
Oh my gosh!
I was like, I just like, I did that. And then this other lady was coming from. I mean, there were bikes all over the place, crawling. They're like ants, you know, they're little pests. And so, like this lady and her, you know, her crew is coming from the other side and like, look, I mean, like, oh, okay, so you gonna hit me too? I was like, hashtag me too. So I let her pass. It was really scary. I really thought that girl was going to be on top of the truck. So that was my blessing that I did not do that. It was like, there was a lot of things on my mind. And yeah, I just almost plastered this poor little kid.
Wow. Thank God, man. Okay. Well, good to hear that you guys have avoided disaster.
I was the bad guy that pulled out in front of you, Jared. That was me this week. So thankfully you were able to react, and thankfully that girl was able to react because
amen.
Golly.
Well, let's continue to avoid disaster, but let's talk a little bit about podcasting. When would you guys say when do you think was the first, like when podcast became a thing?
Well, for me, when I was, man, how long ago would this be? I was teaching probably at Holy Nativity private school. I think I would listen to NPR on the way there. So I listened to All Things Considered. I listened to
as a podcast.
No, well, yeah, I did at that point. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I was listening to them as in podcast form. I listened because I didn't really I would never be on when they had those shows. So like Prairie Home Companion, Whose Line Is It Anyway? All Things Considered, and then later All Songs Considered, they actually released them in podcast form you could listen to online. And then through them, I discovered I got into film at that point. So I listened to Film Spotting, which is a podcast out of Chicago.
When was that? What year was that?
Starting maybe 2005 or so. I listened probably in like 2007 through 9. I even had I actually had an interaction. I was meaning to be a joke, but I really made Adam Kempenaar mad, and he like responded to me, and it was PO'd. It was meant to be a joke. Yeah, it was just stupid interaction. Well, they were talking about I can't remember the detail, but it's one of those like moments like talking to a celebrity that like I've seemed like every time I've met a celebrity, quote unquote, or you know, whether it be online or in real life, like I've just like put my foot in my mouth and made it really awkward. I met this Bollywood character actor in person, and it was really bad, dude. I really hope I get to meet that guy and apologize. Like, he was so mad at me. It was just really embarrassing. Anyway, so my interaction with Adam Kempenaar was like that via email. But that was the first podcast I listened to, and they were kind of evangelists for podcasting.
Yes,
they had a real good format with their show, and so I think that made me realize the power of it. But I never really committed to it. People kept telling me, "Oh, you got a voice for radio, you should do podcasts." And so me and a buddy, we did one in 2010 called the Work in Progress podcast. Typical Ford idea, work in progress. But we would talk about just creativity and stuff, and it was okay. We got it going, but we never really took off with it. And then I don't know, I kind of fell out of the loop. The only podcast I listened to for a while was Michael Farmer's podcast, actually the Christian Humanist podcast. I listened to that for, I don't know, a couple years. And I kind of rediscovered the podcast and like actual consuming it often, probably with Jordan B. Peterson. That's my re-entry to podcast was through JBP.
Yeah, I don't really have any kind of interesting answer for this. I really don't remember. I think I've just kind of off and on, tuned into certain things over the years. And I mean, really within the last year and a half or so, I've just gotten more interested in it from, just from the standpoint of coming on and doing things like this, as opposed to, kind of as opposed to really consuming a lot of stuff. Just kind of because I was in, newspapers for a decade. I had an outlet to, sort of have a voice, even though it was telling other people's stories for the most part. I could have written, I was a sports editor, so I could have written any
editorial.
Any sports opinion columns that I wanted, just on an almost daily basis. But you get enough flack in those jobs just from making people mad about the other stuff you're reporting on, let alone your opinions. And so, so I just kind of avoided that, but it was a creative outlet. And, even now, even though I'm still in a communications job, it's not quite the same thing. So, I've gotten more interested in the last year and a half to be able to, just connect with, you guys and kind of have a creative outlet for, kind of voicing things and especially too more like, not being, bound to, with my job, I was always bound to sports mainly. So, I have a pretty wide variety of interests and stuff. So this is attractive to just be able to talk about, whatever, whenever.
Yeah. And it really is thankful to you, really, that got me into podcasting with reverse redaction. So you really spearheaded this whole thing, because I think neither me or Jared would have really committed to long-term sticking with it. Like had it not been for you being optimistic and putting up with Ford during one of the most Eeyore phases in his life. Like I'd go back and listen to some of those early reverse redactions and I'm like, I am suicidal. Like I can hear it in my voice. Like it's just like so depressing. And then somehow you would like get me out of my shell by midway through the podcast. And I get into a Ford rant and
a frant.
Those frants. And so, yeah, you really helped like pull me out. And I think, Jordan B. Peterson's been talking about that, about the long formness of this medium and how it's really helping. I think, that conversation we had in the previous podcast about autism, I think it's really helping people who are too focused or too maybe tunnel visioning, right? Like to kind of just like Jared said, like to get out of the specialty and to be able to just have this free form and to see where it goes. And the sky's the limit. There's just some great moments that I hear in podcasts where it's just some serendipitous thing that becomes a comedy routine, and some idea that both people are like, wow, I never thought about that. Like that's an invention. There's this creativity just sparking through these confluence of different perspectives. It's much more cooperative. It's almost like a dance. And so I keep in mind, I keep trying to force some structure onto it. It's like never works. And I think that's the great thing about this long form is that like listen to Joe Rogan, like he doesn't really have this format. He just kind of follows the conversation where it leads. And there are these very serendipitous moments that you're like,
when what?
There's these very serendipitous moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, by the way, when you mentioned the other podcast, Ford's talking about the Surfing Violinist podcast. Check it out. Just Google the Surfing Violinist, you'll find it. But I remember when you were talking. I used to be a part of this college of preachers at my church, and it was kind of teaching us to preach. I realized I'm not really a preacher. And one of the problems I had is somebody gave me good feedback, good criticism, and said that when you preach, it's hard to connect with you because you take a different voice, you take on a different voice. And I think that one thing that the long form, I think what you're saying is the long form helps break down that formal, like act. Like you still have to have a different voice. I mean, there's still a certain thing where you want to. But you can only keep it up for so long, right?
Right.
After an hour, you're just like, this is what I really feel.
Yeah. It is just so much more refreshing than, if you go back and watch like mainstream local news, it's just, unless they're like people that have, like there are some local people here that have a good way of delivering it. It feels very personal, but most of the journalistic jargon way of speaking, the way that we talk when we get on the news, So like that gate, it's just so like, I mean, from our generation on down, it's just, I don't think if you put kids in front of a TV today, they would just be like, I'm done. I'm out, like on the phone, But yeah, it's just something that's so artificial and Full Metal Jacket-ish, straight jacketing about it. That's just like, I can't handle this.
Well, let's I just want to read you guys a brief history of podcasting, and let's see what this brings up. So in 2003, the first podcast premiered as Radio Open Source. 2004, an article in The Guardian coins the term podcasting. Again, in 2004, Libsyn, which is liberalsyndication.com, Libsyn.com, launches the first podcast service provider ever. Then iTunes in 2005 released version 4.9, released with native support for podcasts. I think that was huge. And then in 2005, also, I didn't realize this, but George W. Bush becomes the first president to deliver his weekly address as a podcast. And it continues on to get bigger. There's Apple releases GarageBand with a built-in podcast maker. And then I forgot about this, but Ricky Gervais was one of the first big personalities to use the medium and popularize it. Like, he would do these podcasts, and then on YouTube he would do, this is in 2007 he started doing this animation. He would animate it, and some of the funniest podcasts ever.
Stuff with Carl Pilkington.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't realize that's where a lot of that came from.
Yeah, his podcast. And then, there's like technical stuff that helped. Adam Carolla was was another guy who made it. I've tried to listen to his podcast, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's just I like.
Yeah, I mean, neither. I like Adam Carolla, but
comedians don't work for me on podcasts. Like they just don't do it for me. I can't listen to comic podcasts. I just don't get it.
Yeah. And then 2013, Apple announces 1 billion podcast subscribers. In 2014, Apple buys podcast app Swell for $30 million. And it just kind of increased till then, till we have the intellectual dark web. We have it seems like media has the new media has gone from blogs to podcasts. Where it used to be like blogs. Now, no, it's podcasts.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you've got, like we were talking, I guess last week, you've got the opportunity for, listening to, inflection and just things like that, as opposed to reading text. And of course, then, you don't really, you see Q&A stuff with blogs or transcripts of interviews or whatever, but it's, especially if it's a 2-person setup or more, then it just makes a lot more sense as a podcast than written form.
Yeah, it's just so easy. JBP in his most recent podcast was from a lecture he gave talking about, I think it's the final chapter of his book, 12 Rules for Life. It was kind of, just a public delivery of that. And he talks about how basically it's stuff we've all talked about, and Rogan has talked about it before. It's almost like it's a school. You're able to go to school and listen to doctoral level thesis debates and rigorous, like some of these debates, like that's what JBP described it as. Like when his debate with Sam Harris, it felt like it felt like they were cross-examining each other as if they were both doctoral students, and delivering their thesis, and they're trying to pick the thesis apart. And so it's really more of a collaborative peer review sort of competition rather than the old school debate where you're trying to destroy your opponent. So, and when he said it like that, I was like, oh man, and that's why these podcasts are so good. That's why we like them so much. And now you're being able to listen if you're doing a manual labor job, or if you're doing a certain thing where a commute, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, you can go to college. Beyond college, like some of the stuff is like higher level stuff, like, broadening the boundaries of our understanding of a field. And, I'm going back and listening to, like, one of the podcasts that Mises University has is Ludwig von Mises, basically his magnum opus, Human Action, which kind of gives his outline for how Austrian economical capitalist view of world works, and they've broken it up into podcasts, which it's an audiobook that you can go get for free. So many things online that are for free. There's dialogues of Plato you can listen to in podcast form. It's fantastic. It's just I mean, that one that I listened to, the podcast, basically a lecture delivered about Marx, in 13 minutes, I was like, man, I felt like I understood Marx and at least sympathized with him more than I ever have, pretty much in the same way I sympathize with Thanos's motivations, but don't agree with him. But, no, I'm just kidding. Actually, more so than that, even. I was like, okay, I get you. I find this is the best argument I've ever heard for Marxism. I wish I'd have heard this. It's like you really need to steel man your opponent instead of the straw man sophistry we get at the, media level, just the soundbite level. And JPP brings that up, that, when you have a 7-minute ability to talk about something extremely complex, like it took me 13 minutes to get to that point at the end of Marx's book when I skipped through, 13 minutes for me to get something that's like, okay, now I have something to hold on to. It'd be like if you were a Jew and you were trying to convert people to become a Jew, and you picked up the Book of Chronicles and you said, hey, check this out. And it's just a list of names for 10 pages. What did you give me, a phone book? And I feel like we do that, ideologically sometimes, where something is almost that complex, but that's what a person's given, on the news. They're like, you have 7 minutes, sir. Now explain all this background. Well, man, no, that's going to take me like 35. Yeah. I can't do it.
CNN used to have a segment that maybe they still do it. And it's been a while because Jon Stewart used to make fun of it, but it was
that's the Crossfire. That's the infamous Crossfire. Is that it?
I don't know if this was part of it or not, but it was. They would lay out this complex scenario, and then the anchor would say to the guest, "Good thing or bad thing." Oh. And they were supposed to say good thing or bad thing. And the person would start to be like, okay, well, what you have to understand about this. And then they'd just like cut them off and be like, but good thing or bad thing.
Jeez, that is so obnoxious. That's like when you immigrate into India and they're asking you to fill out this question. So are you this or this? It's like, I am not either. You have to fill in the box, sir. Okay. I'm British. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting movement right now, particularly in YouTube, where you have H3 has gone predominantly just podcasts and just videotaping the podcast. Mm-hmm. You have Nigahiga, who's gone predominantly podcasts, just videotaping the podcast. And of course, Joe Rogan and a lot of the intellectual dark webs. So what is going on here? When you go to YouTube, a lot of these, most of what you see is just a couple of guys sitting down and talking to each other with like what we're doing right now. The Surfing Violinist, if you look at that, it's gone mostly podcasts. Like, is that good or bad for YouTube?
I think it's more of a compost heap. I think it's going to yield some great things eventually. I think
good or bad?
Good, great.
I'm joking.
No, I think it's going to be better than. I think we're in this like picking up the pieces, and trying to figure out like where we are, because YouTube is a shipwreck right now, a giant train wreck. But I think something is some really cool, like you said about Ricky Gervais' show. From the sounds of it, maybe that actually led into some of his other show ideas, right? Like Idiot Abroad. Like, it did, yeah. So did Idiot Abroad like basically germinate there? Because they'd have Carl Pilkington on, and they would just make fun of how stupid some of this stuff is said. But what was great, I loved about that is they're making fun of a blue collar normal dude, but at the same time they love him. Mm-hmm. And that's great. That's like a clash. It's a punching down thing, but it's at the same time it's not like they're buddies. It's fun, and you get that with Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo a lot. Like when they're all drunk and high, then it all comes out. Eddie Bravo he's just like Alex Jones conspiracy mode, and they're all just making fun of him, but they all love each other. So I feel that it's ripe for memes. It's ripe for TV show ideas. So I think we're going to see some really cool stuff germinate from this when we're not trying to fit it into a format artificially at the beginning. Because if you think about how much there is on the junk heap of cinema and TV history, how many shows that should never have been made, but someone had to do a day job. And so this gives us the chance to have these open air spitballing sessions, open air board meetings, and table reads. I mean, we read Shakespeare last week on our thing, and wasn't the best thing ever. And we read some Game of Thrones, and it wasn't the best thing ever. But like, I think it gives you like a launching pad to something else. What could be? So, and there's no budget. That's what's great. I mean, it's just we're opening up the to see what's behind the curtain, in the Wizard of Oz. So I think it's great.
What do you think, Jared? Have you noticed this shift on YouTube?
I don't know how much I consume YouTube, compared to you guys. So I don't know if I really have seen enough. I mean, I have certain channels that I watch or listen to. But no, I really haven't probably paid attention to it enough to have seen, how it's trending.
But you do consume a lot of, like, I noticed on YouTube a lot of like talk, and rather than all these Game of Thrones dissections and things are coming as just somebody talking into a microphone on YouTube.
Yeah. Really, that's I'm trying to think of what all I do consume. That's almost entirely it. Like I don't watch. Really, that's just about it. It's I like analysis of stuff. So and I don't have to see the people, so I could just listen to it in audio form. But too, I think part of me always just likes to be able to. I feel better when I can like read people's faces and things like that, So I do, do it through YouTube most of the time. It's where I can see the video too. But that's most of it. Like I'm not really looking for that. That's really why I do it. Like I'm not looking for a visual medium. Or something that's really going to entertain me in a visual medium. I'm really just looking for kind of an in-depth analysis on stuff, or just general mockery. Like there's I think I don't know if I've passed it along to both of you guys, but there's a YouTube channel called The Critical Drinker. And he's this Scottish guy who he'll do some good, positive reviews too, but it's most fun just to listen to him make fun of things, So, so just like I got into him through Game of Thrones, but he's, he'll just do all kinds of stuff, and it's pretty entertaining.
I think for me that brings up not the problem, but I'm sort of I think different than Ford. I got into podcasts because of fantasy football. Kind of like you, Jared, I mostly consumed, or I was mostly into the sports aspect of podcasting. And really when it comes down to it, it's hard for me to really get into Joe Rogan, to Jordan B. Peterson's a little different, because when it comes to podcasts, I want to get something out of it. And that's why when I started Reverse Redaction, I always wanted to kind of like end with what can we take away? Because I feel like there's like some how-to that I need some how-to when it comes to podcasting. I love fantasy football podcasts because you're getting insight, you're getting actionable information. And but it still has, and my favorite thing about podcasts is you're joining in with a community of people that you're getting to know. It's a social dynamic. That is something I love. So you're getting that how-to, you're getting the actionable information through this group of buddies. You feel like you're one of the guys, or you're one of the friends. It could be ladies too. So what do you guys think? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with you. I think you're right. I think it is sort of like, if you listen to a group of group of people, or even just like, Joe and his guests, the way he interacts with them, you kind of almost, feel like you're there, or, you're part of it. To your point about like, it just depends for me on what it is. Like I much prefer, like I'm more likely to listen to Joe Rogan stuff just because it's, in-depth stuff about like the one with Jonathan Haidt on, just call out culture and different things. And having, just being able to get some different, specific insight on stuff like that. As much of a fantasy football player as I am, I rarely ever listen to podcasts on it because I feel like they take too long to get to the point. Like I just mostly with that want to see numbers and trends and what's happening in practice in like more of a condensed form. So it really depends on what the subject is for me, but I tend to gravitate much more towards the Joe Rogan or just the funny stuff like the Critical Drinker.
Interesting. Ford, you listen to mostly Jordan Peterson.
So I have a list of podcasts I kind of go back and forth with. And I'm so ADD, it's hard for me to stay sticking with one thing. Like somebody will say something and it just kind of like, I'm not interested in that, and I'll just stop. I'm real picky and not really gracious, I guess. So generally what I listen to, I try to force myself to listen to Dave Ramsey. He's got his live talk show, his radio talk show split up into 45-minute consumable chunks, basically. So an episode will be broken up into 3 parts. And I listen to those primarily because I'm trying to just get my finances in order. And I found him to be the most listenable Christian in the world. He'll get his Jesus stuff in there. But I feel like I feel like if I were an atheist, I could listen to him and not be like super. I maybe roll my eyes a few times, but I feel like his stuff is so practical and useful. And he goes off on his own little Dave rants. He's got his drants. And when that's what keeps me coming back, honestly. And a lot of times it'll be directed at me. Like, yeah, get out of debt. Quit spending extra money. Eat rice and beans. He'll go on this thing. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I like, all right, yeah, I got it. All right. So it works for me, actually, surprisingly. And that's the weird thing. It's like a lot of times when I'm depressed, it's actually, I don't know, it's a thin line. Sometimes when I'm depressed, that stuff will kick me out of it. And then other times when I don't know, it's like a certain point when I'll hear something like that and I'm just like, just totally sinks me. It's like I just hit the wall. So in those days, Melissa will be like, just don't listen to Dave. Don't listen to JBP today. Stop. Like, listen to Joe Fight Companion. So I'll go turn on Fight Companion and listen to them just talk shit for a couple hours. And I don't know, it'll kind of just get me out of it a little bit. And then what I've been listening to like this last couple of weeks. So yeah, Joe, JBP. What's great about Joe is it's not really Joe. You're listening for, like you said, it's these specific people. And Joe does a great job in a lot of cases. He does a great job of finding the person and meeting them where they're at, and also being a good conduit to, like playing dumb sometimes, and just like, okay, explain this a little better. And so, you're almost like seeing that person through Joe's eyes. He's like being a conduit. This one I've been listening to recently is that the Accelerationist podcast, the Tech War fan podcast, the one I shared with y'all. And I found even the people that I disagree with fundamentally, like the way that they carry themselves online, and they're just too extreme. It's the same thing we're talking about. Because they don't have any format, they'll end up getting in these really interesting little, like this one I was listening to yesterday on the way to work. They're talking about road trips. And I was like, oh, this is serendipitous. Again, I'm on a road trip. And I took a picture and I sent it to one of the guys. I was like, hey, I want a road trip. Listen to y'all's thing about road trips. And he's one of the lesser known guys. And so he actually could, field the thing. He doesn't have as many. So he liked it. And we just had this kind of running monologue. I was like, here, I'm at the gas station. Because they talk about that stupid picture online. Did we talk about this already, about the gas station as dystopia? Mm-hmm. That picture that's going around?
Not with me.
There's this picture of like a roadside, like interstate somewhere in Pennsylvania, and it's just a real wide shot, and so you see like a gas station, a Taco Bell or something, a Burger King. It's just, and it's like people are like urban dystopia or capitalism in action or something like that, and all these guys are like, what? Have you ever driven a car on an interstate for 17 hours? That that is a functional site that looks like an oasis. You get to that thing, you're like, oh, thank God gas. Oh, thank God Monster. Oh, thank God peach rings. Like, it doesn't matter. None of this stuff is good for you. Everyone knows it's not good for you, but it is good for you when you've like lost the will to live in highway hypnosis. Like, it's an oasis, man. Yeah. And so I took a picture looking at like my Monster and my honey bun and my Reese's peanut butter cups in the window, looking past the gas pump towards this beautiful lake on the other side of the street with all these lily pads on it. And it's like, you know, we talk a lot. We air our dirty laundry in the West a lot. We talk about, you know, climate change, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I've traveled the world, okay? Right next to this symbol of urban decay is across the street is this beautiful pastoral site, okay? Like, you can see that at any restaurant pretty much out in the middle of the country. No litter, no trash on the street. Like, that's how the flyover states actually look. It looks pristine. And, you know, we do have a lot of environmental activists to thank for a lot of that. But we also just have good people to thank for a lot of that. We have also have a lot of the efficiency that this sort of thing is afforded for us. And so anyways, they had that conversation and I felt the same thing. I was like, I don't know, you're able to make these connections talking about things that normally you would just hear somebody say as like a party platitude, and you'd be like, oh yeah. And you just feel like, yeah, you're right. We're all so bad. We use gas and it's like, well, the people that are saying that aren't driving cars. You know, they have someone else drive for them, or they're flying in planes that use even more gas. You know, so they're sitting here lecturing us about stuff that they don't have to deal with, and we're made to flagellate ourselves. Like, you know, it's like that scene from Monty Python on the Grill. Like, you know, like we're the ones flagellating ourselves for the sins of the noble class. So
subsidizing malice.
Yeah. And so anyways, the conversations they've had, even when I disagree with them morally or whatever, like I'm like, oh man, I could really have a beer with this dude, you know? And man, I think that podcasting is almost like a way for people to do that, to like sit down and just have a cup of coffee and chat, you know?
I think some of the things I like is when I get off on some rabbit trail and just find a semi-random one. This isn't really a random one because it's from a mainstream guy, but I follow all these newspapers, not national newspapers, but newspapers from across the country online, you know, like Denver Post, Arizona Republic, all these different ones. And so the Denver Post had a story about this pastor who was taking a sabbatical. And so anyway, somehow then that like led me to his like little podcast, because it was like this sort of like large multi-campus church, but it was with a variety of, I mean, just kind of like, I guess, your average mega church. But like the pastoral team, it's like these, I don't want to call them like bros exactly, but kind of, because he's like in his 60s, but the other guys are like, 30 something ish, and, like, except for him, like he's bald and, clean shaven, but he's like hugely muscular, look almost like a, competitive, bodybuilder, and has all these tattoos, and all the, the guys, like the 30-something-year-old guys, are all just like, these graphic t-shirts with the like affliction stuff on them, tattoos, beards, all these different things. And so I'm like, man, this is kind of random and interesting. So I got into listening to his podcast, and he's this pastor of this multi-campus megachurch, but it was interesting because like the elders of his church had put him on like basically like forced sabbatical, because they said he was just like exhausted. And he said like, there's no scandal here. I think that's partially true, but I think like in going through, like, again, this just became a rabbit trail that I went down. And so, like, looking at his podcast and his Instagram and stuff like that, you could tell that, like, he was a guy that had, like, gotten some fast fame, you know, and was probably kind of, you know, venturing into some kind of sketchy territory with it, where he hadn't done anything yet, but it was, again, like, anytime people deal with fast fame, it's and so he's, like, you know, talking about these sponsors that he's got. And I mean, again, this is a pastor, and so on. And then on his podcast, like, they were talking they were talking about, I jumped in, like, later in the series, and he was talking about, and at one point, his guy that hosts it for him was like, yeah, we haven't said wiener yet. And he was like, yeah, I want to get in. We always try to get in, you know, wiener in every podcast. And so then they're like, wiener. Oh man. and so I'm like, what is this? How did this develop? You know? And it was almost like, I went back to an earlier podcast, and it was almost kind of like, not quite, but almost kind of like the scene in Game of Thrones. I think it's at the end of season 7, where Bronn and Jaime are standing on the wall watching the Daenerys's armies roll up, and basically they're, like, talking about how, like, everything goes back to Cox, you know. And it was kind of like he had something, you know, earlier on in an earlier podcast, of something like, you know, just how much we're, like, controlled by our wiener, how men are controlled by their wiener, and just really random stuff to see this, like, you know, mega church, you know, pastor. And so I really just kind of, like, got mesmerized by the stuff, because I'm trying to figure out, like, I don't know this guy from before. How much has this fast fame changed him from what he was before? And the fact that, like, his elders forced him into a 6-month sabbatical, you know, there again led me to believe, like, okay, it probably has, because they were just talking about him, like, you know, just running over, or he was talking about him running over people and things like that. So anyway, yeah, those are some of the ones that I enjoy most, because
what's the name of that podcast?
It's called Rethink, and it's connected to Flatiron's Church in Denver, Colorado, and his name is Jim. Can't remember his last name. Brennan Burgeon. I think it's Jim Burgeon or something like that. So anyway, yeah, just really, really kind of interesting stuff. And then, as a last quick little side note, then somehow on Twitter, I stumbled across this Twitter account where he was referenced in it, and it's just this Twitter thread of what's clearly a paranoid schizophrenic, who the guy's mother apparently went to the church, and something happened that made him mad. And it's just this entire Twitter thread of him talking about how Satan and the FBI and CIA and pastors are all, like, coming together to try to get him. So yeah. So anyway, all of this, you know, just kind of spinning out of a random podcast that I ran across. But yeah, some of that stuff is just, again, from if you're interested in psychology, you know, podcasts can lead you to some interesting little finds.
Well, and there really is a voyeuristic aspect to it, where if you're watching the news, you know, it's just this dude in a suit, but watching a podcast or listening to, you get deeper into their lives, and the voyeuristic part is you get to see, but it's not quite voyeuristic, as you get to partake in it with them.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I guess with voyeurism, you know, you almost think of, like, I don't know the exact definition of it, but I think of it as listening in without the other person knowing.
Consent.
Right. Yeah. So it is sort of this little, it is sort of like a little area in between, where it's kind of like, you know, it's put out there for that purpose, but you do sometimes feel like you're listening on something that, like, there's this Hollywood script doctor and screenwriter that I follow on social media, and I realized that part of what makes me really enjoy his stuff so well is not just that he has really good insight about stuff, but it's that when he gets to the really good material that he's going to give you, he changes from his normal tone of voice and he's almost whispering, kind of like this. And I didn't recognize it right away, but I realized after a while, it's like, oh, you feel like you're getting like secret information. Like this guy's like, oh, come in, I'm gonna tell you this stuff here. And so I think there are just a lot of little, tricks like that where, yeah, it does feel like you're kind of listening in on something that that you shouldn't be getting or something to that effect.
It's exclusive.
It feels exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I noticed that when the ASMR craze broke out, that I realized pastors have been using ASMR for years, like without even realizing what it is. Yeah. And maybe some of them, maybe this actually started by pastors studying the methods of hypnotists, and so this stuff has just been like pastors, demagogues, politicians, like not even realizing they're doing it, but it does have a power of a certain segment of the population. Some people just don't like ASMR doesn't work on some people. They're just like, what are you doing? Like, that's weird. Like, they'll have like a sexual interpretation of it. So it just makes like, what, like jarring. And other people, it's just like, for me, when I was a kid, my grandmother would basically, I guess she had probably taken some hypnotism class or something like that. That's how she would help me and my cousin fall asleep. Like, it's like, it's almost like lullabies, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so, and I when I first heard ASMR and I listened to like one of them, I was like instantly transported. We were talking in that podcast, they were talking about how music and taste can almost be like a oh man, I wish they used the term, but it's almost like a time machine back to another. It's like a sensory time machine that takes you back to the last time you felt that. It's like a marker, and when you feel it, it's like that moment at the end of Ratatouille when Anton Ego eats the ratatouille. He's like flashback. It's not just deja vu. It's too vivid to be deja vu. Like all the pieces are in place and you can relive that moment. And so when I had that ASMR feeling, that transported me back, and I could remember my grandmother saying like this certain little colloquial lullaby sort of thing. So I think it's almost like podcasting. This longer form stuff is again pulling back the curtain so you can see who is actually behind there, what Oz actually looks like. And it's not magic. It's always been science. It's always been like this very planned way of doing things. And so, TV, and to a lesser extent, radio, ironically, to a lesser extent than TV. It's like TV was one of those technological leaps forward that actually wasn't a leap forward. It was a leap backward because it addicted us to image, and we believed what we saw for 100 years. We believed all this crap, and it's all artifice, and it's shortened. So
yeah, I think I had been like probably listening to ASMR since I was a kid, and it just didn't have a term for it because like my ASMR was Bob Ross.
If you're right. Yes, you're right.
And
yes.
And then now, and so like I'll go to sleep a lot of times listening to Bob Ross. And what's funny is I was talking to a coworker who was talking about I didn't even bring it up. He was talking about his friends that do the same thing, that go to sleep listening to Bob Ross. And then all of a sudden, and so you'll be listening, you'll almost asleep, and then he'll like beat his paintbrush against the rack. And so then it like kind of wakes you up. So it'd be better if it was a little bit without that. But that, I mean, for me, it had been, again, since the time I was a kid, there was just no real term for it, I guess. I don't know when the term ASMR kind of really developed or really got popularized, but that's really what it is for me, more so his voice than even the painting.
Right. And so for some people, I mean, I know people who couldn't sleep without the TV on. So they would listen to something just mundane, like, sound of static or sound of news channel, just the drone, it's like the repeatable, you're not have to listen to what is being said.
Right.
And, when I was and I think what happens is people get to especially a very time of anxiety or stress. And really, that's why ASMR blew up. Because when it blew up, I listened to it and was like, and I did use it to get sleep and there's been even times where it's like you can't see outside of the cave. Everything is just, it feels like you're surrounded by noise. And the irony is you need some kind of noise in order to sleep. So, but it's like this soothing noise. For the uninitiated,
I mean, I haven't ASMR, like, I'm not really. Can you?
What it means is sensory meridian response, and it's actually a tactile sensation that people feel. So there's a difference between like being relaxed and what ASMR. There's a certain segment of the population that can feel this, and nobody had to hear about this. We can remember the feeling when we first felt it.
Yeah,
and it's a tingling on the back of your neck all the way up to the top of your spine or the top of your head. It's anywhere between that, and you just feel like all your tendons just go slack.
Can you do it just by thinking about it?
I almost did just now.
I can do it just like I can do it.
Yeah,
I can do it right now.
Yep, yeah. I'm feeling it right now. So, but the problem is when you're in a time of stress, you can't do it. You're just so tight, and then so basically it creates this it's created this whole industry because one person will work for you 1 week, but it's this weird thing. It's like rate of decreasing returns. If you go back and listen to that video, it won't work. Yeah. So you end up like going all over looking for it. And so that's why and then the thing is, then there's that whole kind of quasi-sexual angle, like that's why, chicks tend to get more of an audience because, they'll use some like low cut thing. And, like I listened to, there's when I was first discovering this whole, rabbit trail, Heather Feather, she's one of these ASMR artists, but like she did this one, she was in her laundry room and she's just talking into her phone or something like that. And as soon as she started talking, it's like I had that flashback of my grandmother. But like but it does create this weird thing because like it's like one of the Twitch streamers brought up, I'm a cutie pie, not PewDiePie, but I'm a cutie pie. He's a League of Legends streamer. He was like, what is all this ASMR? And so he'd live on a thing. Like people started sharing all these videos with him, and he's like, all right, I'll watch it. And he's like, man, I can't watch that. That's like low key cheating Alicia, man. That's gross, dude. Like, get this out of here. And so, like, yeah, for certain, like, it's really this weird tenuous thing, like, because it is a pleasurable experience for dudes. Like, I've been thinking about this about dance too. Like for dudes, like we tend to. There's a certain segment of the population that just cannot think of dance in anything other than a sexual thing. And so we just kind of like, it's like a magnet. We're just like, we get past this one letter, like it's sexual. And we over sexualize stuff that doesn't need to be sexualized. And so that's one of the little controversies in the ASMR community is that so many people have this experience. It's pleasurable, but it has nothing to do with sex. It's really more like up here. It's just really about relaxing. But you have that whole contingent where dudes will sexualize a brick or a radiator.
Yeah.
Well, what that makes me think of is connection. Like lately I've been delving into the idea of spirituality and the connection between the overlap of connection and spirituality. You can't have spirituality without connection. And I always thought of that feeling you guys are talking about as a spiritual moment. And it really is. You're connecting with someone, with something on a level that's not physical. You're not touching that person.
Right.
But you're connecting to something, to memory, to,
right.
Like you said, what was the meridian?
Autosensory meridian response.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's very, to me, it's not a sexual thing, but it is like a level of, it does feel like a level of intimacy.
Yes,
that's where I was going.
And some people can't separate those two things.
It's very difficult. I think it's very difficult, especially for dudes. And again, this is one of the problems. I don't necessarily think it's a natural man thing. I think it's a natural man thing in a post-video porn world, where, you always had the slap kiss shock cut and they're like, I'm the pizza delivery man. Bam, now we're having sex. Like, it's just, there's no foreplay at all. I really think that rewired men's brains. Like, I think men have always been probably a little more aggressive in the sexual act biologically, but you look at the natural kingdom, like how peacocks, it's like there's a whole ritual to sexuality in the natural kingdom in a lot of senses. And I think we probably don't even remember what that's like as dudes, like, because we've been rewired, our brains have been rewired to the slap kiss. Like, that was a thing even before pornography existed on screen. Back in, in the Hays Code, movies would have to suggest stuff, right? And the slap kiss became a big thing. I mean, hashtag Me Too ever goes back and watches movies with a slap kiss, and almost all of them had it. It was like the woman is like being hysterical and like, oh, I can't believe you're doing this, and the man just slaps her, and then she's like, oh, and they kiss, and they call it slap kiss, and it's just that shock cut. It's really jarring, and we don't understand that because we watch that and we're like, that's dumb. Back then, I bet like dudes were almost like that was like porn for them back then, because you didn't see that. Like, we're not designed to have that jarring of a reaction, and then porn comes along where it's just like it just jumps from 0 to 100. And so I think that'll again, where it's with podcasting, with audio focus, we're getting to unpack a lot of this and unroll some of this. And people are realizing, oh, there's a whole spectrum here between 0 and 100. Amazing. So I think it is very constructive.
Well, one of my big philosophies is that everything eventually comes back. The cyclical nature of life, that if you start pushing something too far, and I think we've pushed this aspect of non-intimacy too far, like you're saying, the slap kiss too far, to where, and that's why you're seeing podcasting taking over in YouTube and these things, and particularly with men, because of the lack of intimacy. And they talk about like how men express, in psychology, we talk about how men express the need for physicality through sports and stuff, through hitting each other. It's not always a violent thing. A lot of times it's a connection thing. Yes. It's an intimacy thing. And when I think about podcasts are predominantly, maybe just from my perspective, but podcasts are predominantly men. The famous ones.
What do you call? Yeah, what do you call a group of white guys?
Podcast.
Yeah.
We couldn't get halfway through without saying it.
I think maybe, honestly, I disagree with the left and this whole LGBTQ thing. However, I think that there is some truth to gender fluidity. Like that, Ian McKellen said this one time. He was talking about the sense of touch, and that how heterosexual men are just so like, and that he brought a sense of touch that only a gay man could. And I think that there's probably some truth to that something went wrong, and maybe a lot of homosexuality has actually been created by this stiff upper lip sort of thing, where dudes crave this and they can't find it with their father, and they can't find it with other dudes. When you read about like David and Jonathan, it reads real gay in the Bible. It does, man. It's really. Right. I mean, a lot of people have read that they were like, your love is greater than the love of a woman. Like, it's pretty hard to read that as being, like purely platonic. Like, but again, I think too often the left reads that as sex. Like, they don't have a spectrum either. Like, that maybe you can be, effeminate and embrace some level. Like, as a man, we have more masculinity, but we need to be in touch with our feminine side. And so maybe like we've lost a lot of that, stuff that we would automatically conflate as being gay. We just like, oh, okay, we all are holding hands. In India, dudes hold hands walking down the street, and it's not seen as like gay. It's just, it's affection. And so I think we've like put a lid on that, and so it blows up in all kinds of different ways. And so in some ways, I think homosexuality and trans issues, they're just a response to that, because there's something inside like, no, you're not adequately meeting my needs. This society's not meeting my needs. You're not giving me a place to express this. And there are third sex people. I mean, that is a fact of biology. I do believe that. I just think that they're trying to apply it in almost a normative way, when the issue is very complex, and it's like we don't have the nomenclature to accurately identify every individual. So
Dave Fitch, my pastor here, the main pastor here, he often points to statistics that show 80% of, or I think it's like 88% of men that identify as homosexual, also, like, part of their demographic is being from a fundamentalist background, going to a fundamentalist school, or having fundamentalist parents. And he just Dave Fitch, he says that that's
Really? 80%?
he says that that's the biggest the biggest contributor to homosexuality is fundamentalism.
Well, I would say the same thing with atheism. I would say it's a really high rate. It's if you looked at the background of that particular atheist, not all of them, but a lot of them had bad experiences within a very closed theistic system, in which it wasn't modeled well at all. So I think we need to spend more time talking with each other. I mean, and we need to talk more as heterosexuals with people that do identify on those other, and not dismiss everything they're saying, because something real is being felt. Like, I listened to JBP's talk with Milo, and I know Milo is a very controversial figure for the left. Like, they don't like him. They just want to unperson him. They want to pretend like he doesn't exist, but he exists, and he's married to a man. And, he was a flamboyant homosexual who basically lived a riotous lifestyle that eschewed any sort of matrimonial way of looking at things. But then his career tanked because he got deplatformed and everything. And he's like, well, I'm a millionaire. So, you know what? He found a guy he really loved in more than just a sexual way. And he had a really idyllic 2 years where he went off the public scene and they settled down. And he's like, ideologically, I don't agree with marriage, but here I am married. And interestingly, he sees himself as an aberration, but he's proud of it. Like, he's just like, he's a firebrand. He said he's happy to be an aberration. He's like, just embrace it, baby. I mean, and if you go back and look at some gay culture, there is a sense of that where they're just like this firebrand. They didn't give a shit if culture hated them or like ostracized. Like, yeah, that's right, I'm on the outside. You people are losers. You're boring. And you get some of that, like Milo's kind of throwback to some of that in art culture and stuff like that. Because we tend to hear only about the Tchaikovskys of the, that were beat down. But anyway, I'm bringing him up because people are more than one thing. Like, Milo thought he was always going to live this riotous life of promiscuity, but then he settled down in marriage. And like, as a person who believes in heterosexuality, I look at him and I've looked at other gay couples and I'm like, I would make the cake for you because I know you. I disagree with it, but like, I know you and you're more than this. Like, I went out with a gay couple, and it was before everything just went totally crazy. But I was in Silicon Valley and they took me out, and we really haven't had interactions since this. And I really want to get back and talk to them because I had such a great night with them. We had the best conversation, one of the best conversations I had since I got back from India. And it was just, I felt a real connection with them, and I would bake a cake for them. Like, I know them. I'd bake a cake for them. But I just don't, we need to be able to connect, I don't want gay people to think that they don't have a place. I don't want trans people to think that they don't have a place. I don't want to deperson them. But at the same time, I don't want to be depersoned either and be told that I have to think without reservation, without me knowing you, that I have to do what you tell me to do at every turn. Like, that's not freedom. That's not individualism. So we need a broader spectrum. And I think we can get to that broader spectrum through podcasts and through this more open ability to talk things out instead of in this prefabbed, that's the thing, right? Is it good or bad? That's what we're asked. Is it good or bad? Or is homosexuality good or bad? It's like, well, it's complicated, man. I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's great, but I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I mean, I've known some gay people who have been better than me at a lot of things. And so I'm not going to say it's bad. I don't think it's ideal, but am I ideal for sake? No. Golly, if idealism is the litmus test, then we're all screwed, man.
Yeah. Well, and people will say, like it's not natural. And I think, but people say that from a very demeaning standpoint too. They want to use that like abomination or not natural in a clinical sense, in a strictly clinical sense. Right. You're not biologically, men and women are biologically either evolved or designed, whichever you want to pick, to be together. So it is, in a clinical sense, an aberration or unnatural. But, at the same time too, if someone is that way, then, I think from the right, or a lot of times from the Christian standpoint, it's just like, what do you want people to do? Because people want to control that and say, oh, no, don't do this, don't talk about it. Don't. Even a lot of, like, if there's an athlete that comes out, it's well, why have you got to announce it? And I think that's for a lot of reasons. Is but that's not an honest. They're not really being honest when they ask that, like, why have you got to announce it? Because do you think that person would be happy if they were going to a social interaction with that person and they showed up with their boyfriend? No, they wouldn't. And the other person showed up with, if it was a guy and he showed up with his boyfriend, they wouldn't be happy with that either. So there's no
it's catch-22.
Yeah, it is a catch-22. There's no place that we don't want you to announce, basically. And so, yeah, it does just come down to, we just don't want you to be there. We just want you to go away. And I think the example you can point to that with is like the transgender bathroom bills, because again, what do you want here? Because, okay, we don't want people who have, we don't want men in women's restrooms. Okay. But if there are people that look 100%, a lot of them, you can tell if they've undergone a transition, but there are people that have gone, you cannot tell.
True.
Know, and so do you want someone who, as far as you can tell, looks exactly like a biologically born woman or man in the restroom of their, previous gender or whatever. So, no, you're not going to be happy with that either. You're just trying to make it, I think people are just trying to make it so uncomfortable that's like, well, they just won't use public restrooms at all. It is, like you said, a catch-22. We just want you to go away. We don't have an answer for this.
And I think that's where, when they get into that gender fluidity thing, they're trying to emphasize a spectrum, that there is a spectrum on all areas of humanity. And if we ignore it and say, you got to fit in good or bad check boxes, well, these people don't have a place. And then you're building up pressure too, that is going to explode in one way or another. And I agree with Freud that repression just ain't the answer. Like, whether or not something is a problem or a good, like, if you repress it, like, it just becomes a volcano and it works its way out in weird ways. Kink is the result of repression. Kink or suicide, one of the two. Like, and you don't want, like, kink isn't always bad. Like, when we talk about, is it natural or not? Well, drinking a freaking Monster energy drink is not natural.
Right.
Driving a car is not natural.
And when people say that, my mind automatically jumps to flying or using because I could completely see an argument at one point, like, well, if we were meant to fly, God would have given us wings, or using microwaves, X-rays. Like, none of these things are like, take your natural argument and shove it, because you're completely selective with it. And the other thing too that's funny to me is crap, I just blanked on that. What was I going to say? If you got something else, I just blanked for a second there.
Yeah, I think we need more. We need more, even if we're not going to get to the spectrum, we do need more, like, points to talk about.
What I was going to say was, so do you know, just off the top of your head, what is the most complex object in the known universe?
A woman?
Are you objectifying women? What are you doing right now? Oh my God.
So the most complex object in the known universe is the human brain.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say a human being, but yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Right,
though.
right. It does, right? It makes perfect sense. And so, there's a lot of things when it comes to, not understanding, why someone is a certain way, that I tend to leave a lot of, leeway for it. Now, when we do get into like the 146th pronoun, or like I saw the other day, a girl that had on her Twitter bio, my pronouns vary, and so so they vary. So literally from one day to the next, I mean, you've just set yourself up to be offended if because well, no, it's not he she today, it's not he today, it's she today, whatever. Anyway, but generally, I have a lot of leeway on this because the brain is the most complex object in the known universe, I think. And basically, so the more complex an object is, if you just have a rock, there's only a certain number of things that can happen to a rock. You can, break it. If it gets hot enough, you can melt it down. But the more complex something is, the more intricate ways in which it can deviate or break or whatever. So, and it's funny with, with sexuality too, it's one that gets lumped into a morality.
Right.
Like we want to detach it from, a lot of people want to detach it from, from being a cognitive sort of thing to a strictly morality, and to a certain, at some point, like if someone's, molesting kids or something, then it does. But there's so many things that can, happen to a person biologically or mentally, where someone comes out, with schizophrenia or, all kind of progeria. Do you know what progeria is? With the crazy little, it's progeria is the basically accelerated aging, with kids, where they die by like 8 or something, and they look like little. It's the most pitiful thing in the world, because it's not it's not actual accelerated aging in a way, but it's just like a genetic disorder where they look kind of like Dobby from Harry Potter. It is the most pitiful thing in the world. And so we've got all these things. We know there are all these, crazy ways that the human body can, tree man syndrome, if you've ever seen that, to where it's the excess, keratin or whatever, where the fingernails, it just, and so, but it's funny, because of religious texts, we want to take sexuality and say, no, this one's not related to, anything. And we just want to put it over here with, in the morality bowl. So.
Right. But I think morality does help us function as a society, right? And we don't want to like be black and white. We don't want to take it to the other extremes, like, and say, because and getting back to podcasts, I think that's the beauty of podcasts, in the sense that it's not just two dudes, it's not voyeuristic in the sense it's just like a webcam, right? It's not that far into chaos. There are rhythms. We were talking about it before when we were talking about not liking Skype, but preferring this form, because there is a dance that's associated with it.
Yeah.
But it's deeper than, it's like I said before in the Surfing Violinist podcast, it's like the fault often I see in my stance, my perspective as a capitalist, as a conservative, is I tend to apply an approach when, like you're saying, Jared, we're talking about the most complex thing in the universe.
Right.
Yeah. And I do think, as far as, the pushback, I guess, for the politically correct leveraging of this, I would say, biological and anatomical reality that the LGBTQ community is really trying to push, is that the compelled speech part of it, it's a revenge tactic. It's like, oh, well, we've been bottled up so long, we're going to start bottling you down. Now, but the problem with that is, eventually people are going to break, and that's what's happening. And where there's this explosion of, again, it's just going to prohibition does not help anything. So it would be better just for all of us to offend each other. It's like nosedive. Let's just cuss each other out and then let's have a beer. Let's cuss each other out. If it's still not, just come try to punch me. Like, just get it out of your system. Let's get the aggression out. Come on. But let's talk about it, figure it out. Like, let's not go to violence, but no, it's okay if you want to use some violence on me. Like, just please don't shoot me. But maybe they do need to get some violence out of their system. Like, they're just it's been pent up for so long. But we do need to cross-pollinate here, but pretending that we agree on everything and pretending that every person that identifies as LGBTQ is actually LGBTQ. Maybe they're acting out. Maybe they're using that as a cloak to not deal with their own issues. People do that with subculture all the time.
Maybe we're just extremely complex mechanisms.
But there are cultural realities. And what I said in the Surfing Violence podcast is like, why is it that like people who are transitioning in the West always talk the same way? That's a cultural reality. That's not a biological reality. I knew these dudes before they transitioned to become a female, and they did not talk like that. So like, that's an affectation. And so
at times, I mean, I think there are some kids, like there are kids that I've known that were that talk that way from the time I'm thinking of one specifically that he was like 7 years old. But when I think about it, he had a relative that was that way, and he may have picked it up from that way. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but if we're gonna have a spectrum of possibility for people's sexual, gender, biological reality, we need to also have a spectrum of psychological treatments or ways of dealing with it. I think of Lars and the Real Girl. So there's a guy who's deluded and he orders a sex doll to become his wife, and everyone like pretends along with him, goes along this collective delusion that this sex doll is a real person because he's not dealing with issues. There are people, I've met them, that use this as a means of not dealing with their issues, just in the same way that people use Star Wars or whatever. At a certain point, when a person's addiction becomes a means of not dealing with reality, like, it is not helping them to continue to keep up their collective delusion, to join them in their collective delusion. And I do think that there are people who have been sucked into LGBTQ who have been recruited, and they're live action role playing and don't even realize it. So that's what I mean, that there is a more of a spectrum to this. And you know, you go back and read Freud coming at it. He wasn't coming at it from a religious angle. He was coming at it from a psychoanalytic angle. And he was calling some of this stuff deviant, not because it was sinful or against God, but it was hurting the person. And again, we need that on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So my two gay friends, I would bake them the cake because I think they're well-adjusted people and they're good people. You know what I mean? Like my gay Jewish friend, like I would never try to transition him or reconvert therapy him. Like I know him too well, man. But like we need to have allowances for them. But there's some, I'm not saying all the LGBT community is like this, but there are some predators within the community who are really just trying to convert everyone, and they're preying on people who are mentally disabled just to become gay because they want them to be a conquest.
Yeah, I completely agree with your what you're saying about, you know, the room for nuance and things like that. Like again, going back to I'm going to reference this podcast a lot because I liked it, but the Joe Rogan, Jonathan Haidt podcast, where there's just this pressure to agree with your tribe on everything in every case, you know, and that's, you know, and that really is difficult to break away from. Yeah. Nowadays, I mean, a lot of things that I feel like I'm just on an island by myself because, you know, just like defending, you know, where going back to where I was defending like the Covington Catholic, you know, kid, where like I am not eager to generally defend anyone wearing a MAGA hat. That I see that hat and I just have an immediate reaction to it. But like, just from a truth standpoint, like this kid, he didn't do anything, you know? And so it was like that guy, you know, talking to me online. Well, I would, you know, like he was wearing it like a badge of honor. Like I would never defend someone wearing, so you just wouldn't tell the truth is what you really mean then. So anyway, but yeah, I agree with your point about, you know, nuance and case by case basis stuff.
Right. And you're, you know, what you said about like the tendency for the in-group to defend the in-group. And then there's people like me, like you said, that I'll sell out the in-group and join the aliens. Like, they're right. We're a bunch of idiots. Let's just die. So like we do need more. I think both of those reactions though are created by not having that experience with someone outside and realizing, oh wow, I like this person,
right?
And that's one of the fundamental, I would say, characteristics of podcasts, especially the ones on YouTube, is the interview of somebody other.
Yes.
Right? Yep. Even E3, he's interviewing JBP. They're interviewing all kinds of different people. And I think society is moving. I think particularly, let's not say society, let's say media is moving in the direction of more nuance and more complicated discussion.
Yep. I agree.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is a very good thing. Yeah, I hope it is. And I hope it's a reaction to everything that's been going on, for the past 10 years or so, of just the way media has trended to, just left and right.
Yeah. And it culminated. I think we all just had almost psychotic breaks. So many of us, when the Trump Hillary election happened, like that year was just hell. It's for people, but I mean, we've like on the right, we've made fun of that poor person who's become a meme yelling at the heavens or whatever. But I feel like that all of us felt that way in some way or another that year. Yeah. Like we're just like, why are you not listening? That's not what I'm saying. It's just my friend was basically that. Just like screaming to the internet. So like we definitely need to have more grace with one another, I think. And we kind of have to choose to be the first one to do that, because if you just take a few minutes and hold your tongue, usually you'll have a joke that you both laugh at. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that was funny. That broke my rule, but that was funny. And they'll be like, that kind of broke my rule. That's funny, So.
Yeah, I was with a older, what is he now? Like 87. Friend's dad, and so he was going back to a similar conversation to what we were having before, but like he was talking about somehow like interracial marriages came up, and he was just starting to get into he's very much against it, 87-year-old white man, and so he's starting to go off on a little rant about it, and I'm like, well, I don't think anybody's gonna make you have one, so and so he kind of laughed at it, and so
Yeah. And who brought up the manufactured in the other podcast, the manufactured, what is it called? The
Vishnu.
Chomsky.
Yeah, the Chomsky book, the manufactured consent.
So this has me thinking, even when we're talking about affectation of the way we talk, there's something in Noam Chomsky in talking about the deeper evolution or the deeper meaning behind language. It's not just language, it's approach, like, so when you talk about this manufactured consent, I think of podcasts as the answer. So what we're doing right now, I feel like this is the answer. This is the antidote to the news cycle, because I feel like 24-hour news cycle has really come to try to control the narrative, and it can't when we're doing this. It really can't.
It's a combination of trying to control the narrative, but for me, I just think of it more as and part of that was part of my criticism with people like Ben Shapiro and things like that too, but the networks do it too, is having to make news, not even just controlling the narrative, but having to take something that is nothing and just blow it up because you have got to fill hours of space.
Job security. Yeah, you're right. No, a lot of people on the right. I mean, Alex Jones is real guilty of that. I mean, that's why he got deep platforms, because he talked about, I went back and listened to Rogan's podcast with him, and he 20 days, he talked straight about Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
Like 20 or something broadcast, and the dude talks all day, so who knows how many times he said stuff that was offensive in the course of that, because the dude doesn't have a filter,
right?
So I do think it's a little ridiculous though that he gets held accountable for every single thing that comes out of his mouth, when Hillary Clinton is, or anybody, any president, George Senior, and anyone says stuff on the record that contradicts their policy 10 years later, and what they said on the record was reprehensible. You know, it's something that, like, if they just redact, they're just like, oh, we're pretending you didn't say that about immigrants, you know, and like, yeah. So I think
well, that's the interesting phenomenon now of our former vice president having his reverse redaction happening to him.
Totally, yeah. And they're all guilty of that crap, though. I mean, it's just
well, what I'm curious to see with him, how it turns out in the primary, is he's basically almost taking not quite the Trump approach, but basically, like, he hasn't really apologized for anything. And I think he
has.
Not recently, not this stuff, not
this recent stuff. You're right.
Yeah, right.
That is notable.
Yeah, I mean, more specifically, like, he has sort of changed to. We'll see if he sticks with it, but
he'll need to adopt Trump's strategy if he has any chance.
Yeah.
Did you see that tweet that Trump did yesterday
about
the meme? He's playing In the Hall of Mountain King, the Goblin song.
No, I didn't see that one.
So apparently it took like I don't know if it's an actual real-time magazine cover, but it's like the Trump mentality.
That goes through like the year 8000.
Yeah, or something. Yeah. And so he took that and just took it to an extreme. It's like Trump forever.
Oh, I didn't see that. I don't think I saw that one specifically.
So he tweeted a lot, and it's just the ultimate troll. Like, the left really thinks that this guy is not going to leave office in 2028. Like, if you think Republicans with all their guns, all these gun-toting hillbillies, all of them being in lockstep, like, yes, we will be right. No, but according to the Constitution, you can't be in there in 2024, dude. Like, no, you can't take our guns. We're coming for it. Like, Alex Jones would revolt at that point.
I am curious to see because I largely agree with you. I mean, you look at our last three presidents that haven't been great. None have really been great, in my opinion. But they've gotten reelected because people hate change. You've really got to do something to get people to force you out. However, I'm curious to see like which one's going to give here, because I have also seen in two different counties that I lived in, and this is different. This is not an apples to apples comparison, but two sheriffs that were mostly very well liked on a personal level. County was incredibly safe, but their personal lives were just complete train wrecks, that it was just in stuff that was happening that was just known across town and getting in the newspapers and things like that. And people just got tired of it. And eventually took the risk and voted them out because they were just tired of hearing about them. So I think Biden's strategy is basically I saw somebody else who said like Biden is, for white people who don't like Trump or something to that effect, and I don't know that this will work out, but because
it won't. I mean, because they tried that attack, on Trump the first time. And, if Trump got away with what was allegedly making fun of a person with cerebral palsy the 2 weeks, like he's gonna get away with anything else. And here's the reason why: because the left has been disingenuous about this character stuff for 40 years. We care about women. We didn't care about Chappaquiddick. We care about women. JFK, sleeping with an 18-year-old. Yeah, we care about women. Yeah, right. So
what Jared's talking about is a little bit more about like Trump fatigue.
Yes,
I think.
Not outrage, like.
There was no Bill Clinton fatigue, with him, treating
That's
Monica Lewinsky like a,
No, but I think it is. I think it is different. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's gonna. I after 2016, I am not willing to, put a penny down on, on predicting what's going to happen. But I've just seen it on a smaller level, fatigue that happened where I'm just like,
I understand that, but I think there's so much resentment from middle America that people that otherwise would definitely not vote Trump are just voting out of spite at this point. He's going to win popular vote this time. I'm telling you, it's going to be a landslide. He's going to win a popular vote. It'll be the first time that's happened in a long time for the Republicans.
But to bring us back to podcasting and to kind of bring the two subjects together, Scott Adams, one of my favorite podcasters these days, talks a lot about influence, and he often talks. So it could be that people get kind of what we're talking about, get media fatigue instead of Trump fatigue and start turning on CNN and Fox and kind of forget Trump. But he talks, so Scott Adams talks a lot about influence and influencers and the chess game, in politics. And it's very interesting. I challenge you guys to watch a couple of his podcasts, his broadcasts, his whatever. He's kind of a kooky guy, and he's not right or left. He's just, I think he's obviously pro-Trump, which is, there's a bias there.
And that's one of the problems, I think, that it just like it even affected the air in this podcast, just the fact that we're forced to choose between two options at the
good or bad.
Good or bad, and the most ultimate office in this nation. Like we just got to have a better structure here. We need I don't know, politically, maybe there isn't a hope until we can get 12 parties and it's like a team of rivals, and they're there's 12 people, and you have got the 12 parties, and you vet your number one of the 12, and then they have to make collaborative decisions. They actually have to make a cooperative decision for every single thing that happens. It's like in between Parliament and in between King, this, it's in between House, and it's in between executive, because this whole thing of this either or, it just forces us to pick a side, and then you are imbued with the sins of that person. So, if I defend Trump, then I am a misogynist. And and if you defend Clinton, then from my perspective, you're a misogynist. So it's we're just arguing over who's the bigger misogynist. Okay. I'm are we really going to talk about misogyny with Biden? The way that he touches women, so, that's what it ends. It ends up being this stupid morality tale, and it's just God.
It becomes a tit for tat.
Yeah, it's just dumb. I just, the system is whacked beyond measure. And so the great thing about podcasts is it does give us time to talk about stuff with more nuance, and maybe we can solve, why are we taking all this stuff as a given? Why do we assume that this is preeminent and will always exist this way? The kings and the nobles of old thought that. The guys that penned the Magna Carta thought that they penned the final document. What if the Constitution really isn't the final document? Why do we think it is? And we need iterative rule set changes. We need rolling updates. We need a better series of systems. And the market has shown us a lot of what this kind of looks like. So yeah, Trump is no savior.
Well, as we wind down, what I think what I'm getting out of this is the importance of in our daily lives to take a podcast approach to people, and remember that people are the most, that a brain is the most, and think about that as we talk to people. And my pastor talks about, when talking to people that you disagree with, allowing time and space, giving space, making space for these things to unwind. And I think that's what the podcasts do, is it gives space to unwind, because we're so wound up in our our ideals and our perspectives and our dogma, that I do appreciate the podcast form. I appreciate this, guys. I really love talking to you guys. And I appreciate that we're not all on the same page, but we can still come up. What did you say earlier? To find diamond in the rough type stuff, signal, something in the signal.
Signal in the noise, yeah.
Signal in the noise. There we go.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for, I don't know, ruining the mood. We had a very constructive. Are you feel okay?
Yeah, no, okay. When we first started talking about that we were going to do this, or when Judah said he wanted to do it, I was like, I'm not sure. I feel like this is going to kind of have to meander a little bit, just because podcasting is such a general topic. So I figured we would kind of get off onto these little, side roads. And I was honestly looking forward to that, because I thought yeah, it's just going to like spin off into some other little things. So we've touched on a lot of stuff that could be its own podcast,
Yeah. And I really did. I mean, my favorite part of the podcast was us talking out. And this is one of the things that Naval said about why he likes this form, is because it allows him to connect thoughts that weren't there. He didn't necessarily have connective tissue. He had one idea, and he basically had a God in the gaps between them. And I didn't have a bridge connecting them. So when we talked out that LGBTQ thing, I think I made some connections I hadn't really thought before with all of us together talking with a bit of a different perspective. We're all obviously, white men or whatever, but we definitely see some of these things differently. We've had different experiences. And so that was helpful for me. And one of the things you brought up too, Judah, there was something one of you said about, it made me think of the Tower of Babel for some reason, where it's like these shortcuts force us to come to a conclusion too quickly. And then it causes, it's like a God of the gaps, really. Like the whole solution is we're going to get there tomorrow. And if you think about what the myth of the Tower of the Babel is that we've got to have this thing that's going to reach us in the heavens and we're going to be God. And then God smites the people with this breakup of the language. And really, it's like we as humans, we're still not ready, even in 2019, for total understanding of one another, because it would go to our heads and we'd do something crazy with it. It's like Michael Crichton's The Sphere. If we had the object of our desire, we could do it. We would actually use it for horror. Like that's the whole purpose of that movie, is like we're not smart enough yet to really do it. And what podcasting does is allow us to quit trying to look for that quick fix, that magical wish fulfillment dream, that genie, to
the slap kiss. It gets us away from the slap kiss.
Yeah, it allows us to kind of figure out things on a case-by-case basis and try to interact with individuals who have their own unique biological and cultural curation of experiences that have turned them into who they are today, and that we can actually see that person instead of seeing a type or a good or bad, So I think it's been really good listening and talking. So
yeah, I mean, it's almost in a way kind of the reason that I prefer television to movies. There's always something that's like a little bit inauthentic. Even to great movies, there's something a little bit inauthentic trying to watch a character change over 2 hours, Whereas, in television, you can watch it happen, get like Breaking Bad is the example of like, can you imagine like trying to watch Walter White in a movie go from nerdy chemistry teacher to this, drug kingpin that's willing to just, kill all these people.
Totally.
But in a television series, it just feels authentic and natural. And I'm such a huge fan and proponent of just long form storytelling in whatever we're talking about, just because, coming from a psychology background, it's just inauthentic to try to cram it into a short space.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you think about what counseling entails. It's just, meticulously picking apart these things. And that's why it really does need to be on a case-by-case basis, whatever difficulties we're having in life. And podcasting, I think maybe it is like an extended counseling session for all of us, just a way to
it's like almost like group therapy.
Yeah, you're right. It's almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting for people who are tired of being pissed off or depressed, and wanting to find ways to connect.
And tired of the slap kiss news cycle,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's constructive, and I think it's got some real possibility.
All right. Well, on that note, get out there, get to work. There's a lot to build, guys.
Make your own myth.
Keep moving forward.